Earthlings, and welcome to today's video. We're going to be talking about a woman named Kaitlyn Armstrong. When I heard about this, I was genuinely very shocked because of the measures that Kaitlyn goes through in order to try to evade arrest. So without further ado, let's get right into the story. Kaitlyn Armstrong was born on November 21st of 1987. She grew up in Lithonia, Michigan, and graduated from Stevenson High School in 2005, and attended Schoolcraft in Eastern Michigan University. She would become a yoga teacher and a realtor. Kaitlyn Armstrong would meet Colin Strickland, a professional cyclist, in 2016. They would begin dating and then would move to Austin, Texas, and they shared a passion for cycling and traveling. Their relationship was described as rocky and would briefly result in a separation in the fall of 2001. During a 4-day race in Idaho, Strickland would meet Anna Mo Wilson, a fellow cyclist, and this was during the separation period between him and Kaitlyn. This brief relationship would result in Wilson moving to Austin, Texas in order to pursue it, but it only lasted about a week or so. Strickland states that after the breakup that Wilson would move to San Francisco and the couple would remain in touch and they would still be friends. Strickland describes their relationship as platonic and a professional one. Wilson was born on May 18th of 1996. She grew up in Kirby, Vermont, and she graduated from Burke Mountain Academy in 2014 and Dartmouth College in 2019 with a bachelor in engineering. She was born in an athletic family. Her parents, Eric and Karen Wilson, were both on the U.S. ski team. At Dartmouth, this is where she would join the Upland skiing team, fulfilling a childhood dream. She would eventually transition into gravel cycling. After Wilson and Strickland parted ways, Strickland would rekindle his relationship with Kaitlyn. Though they were back together, Armstrong became jealous and suspicious of Wilson. On May 11th of 2002, Wilson would travel to East Austin, Texas to stay with her friend Kaitlyn Cash in her apartment. She had plans to meet Strickland while she was in town. The pair had met up to go to Deep Eddy's Aquatic Center in Austin before going to the Pool Burger for a meal. Strickland dropped off Wilson at Kaitlyn Cash's apartment around 8:30 p.m. Later that night, Kaitlyn Cash would return to her home to find Wilson bleeding and unconscious, suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. Cash would call 911 and try to revive her friend, but unfortunately her attempts to do so would fail, and Wilson was pronounced dead at the scene. Police stated that it appeared to look like it was a targeted attack. Investigators started off with Strickland due to the fact that he was the last person to see Wilson before she was murdered. Strickland would take investigators over the events of the night that he had with Wilson. During their investigation, this is when they would find out about Wilson and Strickland's intimate relationship that they had briefly, and how Strickland's current girlfriend, Armstrong, was a little bit jealous about that. Investigators discovered a security camera showed a Jeep driving to Cash's apartment and parking in an alley shortly before Wilson was murdered. Police got calls from a couple people. A friend had called to state that Kaitlyn had found about the on-again, off-again relationship between Strickland and Wilson back in January. Another caller, who was identified as Jane in order to hide her identity from Kaitlyn, stated that Kaitlyn became furious and shaking with anger, and she stated that she wanted to kill Wilson. Armstrong would call Wilson and order her to stay away from Strickland. Armstrong was then taken into custody and questioned by police when investigators figured out that she had a past warrant for theft by service charges. During questioning, investigators found that Armstrong had become angry and evasive during questioning, and investigators showed the security tape of the black Jeep Cherokee outside of the apartment where Wilson was killed. Investigators stated that Armstrong stayed still and grounded, and eventually nodded at the suggestion that maybe you were upset and just in the area. During the interview that they were having with Kaitlyn, investigators would discover that the warrant that they were holding her on was not valid, and they could not hold her, so Armstrong would be released. The day after Armstrong's interview, Armstrong would disappear. She would sell her Jeep to a seller for $12.2K, and she booked a flight ticket to fly out of Austin Bergston International to Houston Hobby before taking a connecting Southwest flight to LaGuardia in New York. Police issued an arrest warrant for Kaitlyn on May 17th, and the next day on May 18th, Armstrong would appear in the Newark Airport in New Jersey, but investigators never witnessed her boarding an outgoing flight. Deputy U.S. Marshal Western District of Texas, Brandon Villa, stated that after investigation that they figured out that Kaitlyn had gained access to her sister's passport, and after searching the name, found out that she had booked a flight to Costa Rica. The investigators would notify the authorities in Costa Rica, and the authorities there would begin to investigate popular tourist spots for Armstrong. Armstrong would be located and arrested in June of 2002. Investigators would track her down to a $17 a night hostel and yoga retreat in the popular surf resort of Santa Teresa. Armstrong would initially give investigators fake names, and when they ran through the immigration system, they would come up as bogus. And so she would eventually give her real name, and when searched, came back to a match for the international arrest warrant that she had out on her. When authorities arrested Armstrong, she looked much different than when she was in the United States. She had cut her long strawberry blonde hair, and she cut it short and she dyed it darker. And investigators also found receipts from a surgical office that showed that Armstrong had gotten a nose job just 3 days before her arrest. Armstrong would be deported back to the United States and charged with first-degree murder. The Wilson family would make a statement after the arrest of Armstrong. "We're relieved to know that this phase of uncertainty is behind us, and we trust the justice system will prevail," is what one of the members had said. October 11th of 2022, Armstrong had an appointment for medical, which required her to be transported to his physician. Correctional officers tagged along with her visit. Everything went smoothly until leaving the medical facility. Armstrong, she decided that she was going to run. There is video footage of the moment that Armstrong decided that she was going to flee. The video shows Armstrong running across the yard towards a wooden fence. She leaps the fences and the video footage cuts out. It does show a correctional officer following after her, but they slip and fall in the grass. She only managed to run for about a mile before she was caught and recaptured by the police and returned to jail. The agency is quoted saying that during the foot pursuit, officers advised inmate Armstrong to remove her county-issued black-white striped uniform pants, which revealed she was wearing thermal pants underneath in the effort to disguise her appearance as an inmate. The affidavit also states that inmate Armstrong was able to manipulate her left hand from the hand restraints to assist her escape attempt. There's also apparent evidence that showed that Armstrong had planned this escape. There is surveillance footage of her in her cell, noticing that she would be running and doing squats and yoga throughout her day room and recreation time. Investigators also believe that Armstrong faked the medical complaint about her leg in order to get out for medical, and along with not having to put on the leg restraints upon medical request. During the search of Armstrong's jail cell, investigators found a ballpoint pen and dental floss. They also found that the pen had been broken off. And the pen is a part of the pen. It's very confusing, but it is a part of the pen. It's the top part of the pen. It's kind of confusing. I had to search that up, but it is a part of the pen. Investigators believe that this was used to remove her handcuffs. The trial for Armstrong began. Strickland would take the stand to testify. He stated that even though he did love Kaitlyn, he described their relationship as tumultuous, and this was due to her constant jealousy. Strickland explained that Armstrong and him met on a dating app in 2019, and they would break up frequently, quote unquote. "I was highly uncertain if I wanted a long-term partnership with her." Strickland stated that Armstrong kept a very close eye on his communications with other women, even going as far to say that at one point Armstrong had messaged him an intimate photo that a woman had messaged him in private, and he has no idea how Armstrong got a hold of that particular private intimate photo. Strickland states that he believes that Kaitlyn got access to a host of his personal information, including bank accounts, Facebook, finances, and passwords. When Strickland was asked why he did, in fact, purchase a gun for Armstrong in 2001, his response was that Armstrong said that she was experiencing paranoia over road rage accidents and the rise of homelessness and the population, and she was just afraid of biking alone. So he felt like, he wanted to be nice, I think. Strickland recalled on the stand the numerous times that he witnessed Armstrong get enraged in jealousy over his brief relationship with Wilson, who he referred to as an immense talent. Strickland states that on one incident that he had posted a video of him and Wilson along with a group photo of other cyclists to his Instagram, and Armstrong had sent him saying, send my love to Mo. The court presented the text messages of Armstrong's behavior after he and Wilson hung out one time at a Meteor Cafe, which is a area or a little cafe that is in the Austin area. Armstrong had sent Strickland, I know you know better than to show up to the Meteor with that girl. Another text shown suggested that Armstrong had contacted Wilson personally. In a text, Strickland had stated, "Did you call Mo? What the F?" He sent that to Armstrong. Strickland admits to the courtroom that even though him and Armstrong had gotten back together, he saved Wilson's name under another name in order to avoid conflict. He states that the last time he saw Armstrong was on May 13th of 2022, which was 2 days after Wilson was murdered. "You know Kaitlyn well, don't you?" Kaitlyn's lawyer asked Strickland on the stand, and Strickland responded, "No, I don't," shocking everybody in the courtroom. The 911 phone call made by Kaitlyn Cash the night that she found her friend dead in her apartment was played to the courtroom. This caused Cash to be visibly upset on the stand, along with several members of the Wilson family to cry and many to even leave the courtroom. Cash would describe to the courtroom that Wilson was covered in blood when she returned home on the night of May 11th of 2022.
From the moment that I got home, I started doing chest compressions, which was the longest 10 minutes of my entire life.
Armstrong was described as emotionless throughout the entirety of the trial, even when graphic photos of the crime scene were displayed. Investigators used vehicle satellite records, phone tracking data, surveillance video from a nearby home that showed Armstrong's Jeep driving around the apartment and parking into the alley shortly before Wilson was murdered. There would be key evidence that was found in that alley that would link Armstrong to the crime. In closing arguments, the prosecution suggested that there was an overwhelming amount of evidence that would link Armstrong to the crime and asked the jurors to ignore the quote-unquote rabbit holes that the defense was asking them to go down. Assistant District Attorney Rick Jones told the jury that the last thing that Wilson did was scream in terror. She, Armstrong, stood over her as she shot her in the head twice, then put another bullet in her heart. You heard the medical examiner. The third bullet was in her heart. He states that the evidence against Armstrong is some of the most damning evidence he has had in his career, stating that 2 of her own friends came up to testify that she either said that she wanted to or could kill Wilson. Quote unquote, he says, "I have never seen so much evidence against somebody in my life." Defense attorney Rick Coffer told the jury that Armstrong had been quote unquote caught in a nightmare of circumstantial evidence. The jury spent 2 hours deliberating and would return with a guilty verdict. The Wilson family embraced each other and cried after they heard the verdict. Meanwhile, Armstrong remained emotionless when she heard the verdict. She was facing 5 to 99 years or even life for this crime. The victim impact statements were then read to the courtroom. Karen Wilson, Wilson's mother, said that her daughter was strong, independent, and delicate, and hated inconveniencing others. Quote unquote, "I just miss her, and nothing I can do can bring her back, and I know that coming down here. I would have done anything to stand in the way of the bullet, and I wasn't there to help her. I wasn't there to protect her. She just died alone on the floor of her friend's house, and she did not deserve that." Eric Wilson, her dad, stated how proud he was of his daughter, quote unquote, "You're living through a bad nightmare, a bad dream. This is not a dream. This is reality. I think about it every night." She was a beautiful young woman. She was just coming to her own really as a cyclist in the last year, and I know she wanted to become a professional cyclist, and she achieved that dream. Matthew Wilson, who was her brother, broke down when describing how he learned of the death of his sister, stating that he felt his pain had been different than the pain of his parents. Quote unquote, "My sister was my closest confidant, my only sibling, and the only person in the world that he could share certain experiences with that she could only understand, and she was a really, really good listener." The court also did hear from Armstrong's family. Mike Armstrong, who is Armstrong's father, said, quote unquote, "It's a really difficult time. It's been a tragic time, but I also would want to say it's far worse for the Wilson family. I cannot imagine what they are going through." Christine Armstrong, who is Armstrong's sister, stated that she respected the verdict of the jury, but she described her sister as a loving, caring, beautiful, bright light, and she just was a special person. She states that she has always looked up to her sister and that she loves her very much and that she hates that she is being painted in this light. She is not a bad person and that she has always cared for other people, and if you ask anybody that knows Armstrong, they would say the same thing that she is saying right now. When it came down to sentencing, the prosecution asked the jury to consider the quote-unquote calculated nature of the shooting, her attempt to flee, and the traumatic impact of the murder that it had on the Wilson family, along with Kaitlyn Cash, who found her friend bleeding to death in her home. The prosecution asked the jurors to start with a minimum of 40 years and then quote-unquote go from there and decide what they deemed appropriate. The defense, on the other hand, had no suggestions when it came down to the sentencing. Over a year and a half after the murder of Wilson, on November 17th, Kaitlyn Armstrong was sentenced to 90 years in prison. The jury deliberated for only 3.5 hours before delivering said verdict, to which Armstrong again appeared to have no reaction to the sentencing. After the verdict, Karen Wilson spoke again for the last time to Armstrong and stated that, "Kaitlyn Armstrong, I am not sure that my words can penetrate your heart, but I'm gonna try. I hate what you did to my beautiful daughter. It was selfish and cowardly. When you shot Mariah in the heart, you shot me in the heart. You shot Eric and Matt in the heart. You shot cousins, aunts, uncles, all the people who loved her in the hearts." And she urged Kaitlyn to admit her guilt and seek forgiveness. Quote unquote, "It's up to you. There is no winner in this story. Your actions have caused all sides to suffer. There is a ripple effect to the sorrow upon sorrow. Mariah is free from this sorrow, though she is more alive today than any of us here." As she left the stand, Karen Wilson would look Kaitlyn Armstrong directly in the eye, but it is uncertain and unclear if she looked back. Eric Wilson would speak to reporters outside of the courthouse following the verdict and stated that this was a time for quote-unquote prayer and healing. This sad story is a perfect example of why integrity and honesty is crucial in our personal relationships and how dishonesty can often lead to unsettling consequences. Selfish manipulation, jealousy, and hate never lead to positive outcomes. Silence is never a good way to solve personal issues. In fact, it doesn't solve anything. It only leads to suffering. Our lives would change forever, but with this challenging ordeal now behind us, we are ready to move forward and continue our healing. And we will do this with Mariah's strong, determined, gentle, and kind spirit, because we know that this is what she would want us to do. And that is the end of today's video. As devastating as this case is, at least the bright side of this is that Wilson did get the justice that she deserves, and now the Wilson family can go forward trying to heal with the loss of their loved one. So, without further ado, if you liked today's video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and until next time, be safe, Earthlings.